What's up, everybody? Today we're going to be talking about Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave and all of the things I'm hoping that they bring into a new installment. First of all, if the rumors are true, we should be seeing more about this game quite soon. So we're going to find out if my thoughts are going to be obsolete in the next couple of weeks here. But I still wanted to make this video just to do some hyping, get out my thoughts, and maybe do a little bit of wishful thinking as well. So quick background about me. I started playing Fire Emblem Sacred Stones. That was my first Fire Emblem game, but I was a little bit too young to know what was going on. After that, I ended up playing most of the subsequent ones. I played Shadow Dragon on the DS, I played Awakening and Fates, and then I played Three Houses and Engage. And if you have watched any of my previous videos, Engage is kind of what made me a super fan of Fire Emblem. I think this is the first game I played Classic mode. I think there's really something about playing a Fire Emblem game in Classic mode that can really make or break a player. And if you get through those challenges, it can really get you to fall in love with this style of game. So ever since beating Engage, I spent the last 3 years dreaming up all the cool mechanics and features that the next Fire Emblem could have, and waiting for every single direct, hoping that we'd get an announcement. So without further ado, let's get into it. Here's my wish list for Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave. First thing we got on my list is smarter enemy AI, and I just want to preface this point by saying that Fire Emblem has always had some pretty strong enemy AI, at least from my recollection. Going back to Fire Emblem Engage, I only played the game on maddening mode, so that's all I can speak to. But those enemies were pretty ruthless. They did a lot of little things that made it really feel like they're going in for the kill in every single battle, and not just going easy on you. Just one example of this is whenever you had a dodge tank and the odds of hitting them were 0, they would essentially just keep walking and ignore them. Additionally, they would always prioritize killing your units. Many times there were situations where I couldn't even predict what they were going to do, and within one turn they would slip past my defensive position and immediately kill a unit. So yeah, I think Fire Emblem already has really good enemy AI, but I just have a couple ideas on how we can make it even better. So my first idea would be to have enemies have a more dynamic thought process, which would ideally be proactive over reactive. For example, if an enemy finds themselves stuck in one of your choke points where they're unable to kill the unit in front of them, instead of spending the next couple turns kind of banging their head against the wall, they could communicate with a few other units nearby and dynamically decide to attack another flank or find another strategy. They could also change how thieves work in most of the Fire Emblem maps. Maybe instead of making a beeline to the treasure chests and then right out of the map, they can have a much more dynamic decision tree. Instead of grabbing the item and leaving, they could take the item and back up and go give it to the boss. Or really just a handful of other things. I think this is just one example. Overall, it would be cool to feel like you're fighting against an enemy tactician who can kind of adapt on the fly and come up with different strategies and counter strategies depending on what you do. And to add even more to this concept, what if we had an enemy AI that updates its directives dynamically based on the health of the army? To illustrate what I mean by this, let's pretend we have a map where there's an enemy general or a powerful boss that's surrounded by healers in their backline. And let's say this is a route map as well. Once the general is killed, maybe the remaining support units could prioritize survival and escape, or maybe some form of guerrilla warfare instead of fighting you more head-on. More broadly speaking, it would be really cool if the enemy was able to calculate both the strength and their positioning of their army and reorient how they make decisions accordingly. Alright, moving forward, we have the second item on my wish list. I would like an increased use of verticality in gameplay. So I was thinking about this a lot while I clocked in hundreds of hours of Triangle Strategy and Final Fantasy Tactics. Both of those games make excellent use of verticality for strategic decision making in gameplay. I know it might seem like a minor change, but there's just a lot of interesting complexity that can come from the increase in verticality. For example, mobility is now that much more important, not just distance in the X and Y axis, but also the Z axis as well. Units with superior mobility will also benefit from increased survivability as well as utility. Verticality can also make a huge difference in combat, especially ranged combat. Increased line of sight, range, and damage modifiers can make an archer on a hill 10 times more of a threat to deal with, for example. Alright, let's move on to talking about classes in Fire Emblem and how I think they could be altered and improved. So I'm going to start off this section by being a little bit more selfish and going over what I want to see as far as the class system, and then I'll get into what I think would make the class system better for everyone. One of my favorite things in all of video games is a summoner class. Something about that concept is so cool to me, and I know a lot of games have tried to implement something like a summoner class. I've seen it in most genres, FPSs, ARPGs, even tactical RPGs. I know there's a class like that in Final Fantasy Tactics. And funny enough, even in that Mario plus Rabbids game, there's a couple familiars you can summon, if I remember correctly. And before I forget, I know Fire Emblem has even done a summoner class before in Sacred Stones. But what I'm looking to see here in Fortune's Weave is a little bit more of a robust summoning system. Ideally, summoners would be a recruit level class and can promote into 2 or 3 different tiers, each with their own special perks and abilities. And unlike Sacred Stones, which only allowed summoners to create a pretty rudimentary pirate class with 1 weapon, I think it'd be super cool to be able to customize and outfit summons with their own weapons / spells and even skills. And based off the first trailer for Fortune's Weave, it looks like Intelligent Systems is already implementing one of these classes with Lita in the Hunter class. And seeing how the summons cost HP and can only be used once per map, I think IS is thinking a lot about how to balance what a summoner class might look like. So yeah, I hope that Hunter class is more than just a gimmick for the trailer and is actually a viable way to play and has a lot of mechanical depth baked into it. Moving on from my personal love of summoner classes, let's talk about how the class system can be improved as a whole. So I know a lot of people have mentioned this and I tend to agree. I'm not the biggest fan of the system where any unit can become any class. I think it makes units feel less personal and less interesting. And I can understand where Intelligent Systems is coming from because it does give players a lot of variety in how they want to approach each chapter in Fire Emblem, and it also can prevent people from soft locking themselves if they lose their only healer or something like that. The fact that any unit can become any class saves you from a lot of those inconveniences, especially when designing around permadeath where each death is final. So here's what my ideal class system would look like. Multiple tiers of promotion, each of which comes with a choice of 2 to 3 different classes. These promotion trees could sometimes intersect, but for the most part, each class has its individualized promotion tree. This would give each class its own feel. So for example, a warrior will never be able to turn into a sage, etc. But due to the optional promotion paths for each class, you would be able to build your unit based on your party's needs. So in my system, each promotion option would give you a choice between versatility and additional competence within the class. So let's pretend you lost your Swordmaster in the previous chapter, but you're able to promote your Thief. In this system, you could either promote your Thief into an Assassin with some additional unique bonus skill, maybe like Lethality or something, or you can turn your Thief into an Assailant with Sword Access to fill the gap that you lost when your Swordmaster died. So yeah, I like this idea because it doesn't make every unit so impersonal where anyone can be anything, like I mentioned, but the branching paths will give you a lot of option to replace the slots that might be missing when units die. So yeah, basically just take the leveling system from Sacred Stones and plop it into this next game. Alright, next item on my wish list is more status effects / modifiers. So in its current state, Fire Emblem doesn't really have many mechanics around weakening or debuffing an opponent. We have effective damage and poison, but not a whole lot else. And on one hand, I like how this forces weapons and tomes to be beholden to the math behind accuracy, might, weight, and the other stats like that. So axes will generally do more damage but have accuracy issues and so on. This does make weapons and spells feel different from each other in gameplay, but I think Fire Emblem can do more. So some easy stuff that they could add would be like fire, being able to light the ground on fire and cause damage to anyone that walks through those tiles. Wind can push enemies around, lightning could paralyze enemies or damage adjacent enemies, and the system could get even more intricate. Maybe dark magic could have some kind of effect on sanity, where getting hit too much with dark spells could make a unit go insane, or there could be like a fear modifier which makes units less accurate or make them attack units as soon as they get into vicinity. And to get even more out there, it could be really cool if some of these additional ways to debuff or cause damage to enemies could exist between chapters. With permadeath as a core mechanic in these games, I think the natural evolution of this could be semi-permanent or permanent debuffs. Insanity, curse, blood loss, even dismemberment. All these things could affect your army as they go through each chapter. A lot of people play these games and get super attached to their units as they go through their individual journeys within gameplay. Imagine that, except now your lord has an insanity debuff or broke his arm or something and is still able to beat the final boss with those ailments. So with this mechanic, every single end game army will not only have different units and different customization, but also a different set of ailments, which should make every run feel that much more personal. And why not limit this feature to just your army? I know a lot of people were annoyed, myself included, about the bosses in Engage coming back chapter after chapter after chapter. Maybe these inter-chapter debuffs could affect them as well. That way, if you poison a boss or whatever you do to the boss, maybe that state could be remembered and the boss will be in that state for the next fight. Okay, one more item on my list before I get out of here. The last thing I wanted to talk about was the inter-map sequences, like the Somniel or the Monastery in Three Houses, or those little menus / small little screens where you can kind of navigate between the armory and wherever else between chapters. So I've never really had too much of a problem with how Fire Emblem has done this in the past. I think all of their answers for how to pace the game between battles have been pretty good, but I still think these sections can be improved. And I think what the best answer would be here is something that completes the gameplay loop. Here's what I mean by that. So if you look at the XCOM games, collecting resources from dead enemies helps with research and base building in the sections outside of battle. Research and base building will then help you unlock new skill trees and resources to outfit your army, which will subsequently make your army stronger and more capable to defeat enemies and collect the resources that they drop, which completes the gameplay loop. I think this idea of feeding each component of the gameplay loop into the next could really easily be implemented into Fire Emblem. FE has always had optional goals in chapters such as visiting houses for loot or collecting treasure chests. This stuff could easily be reconfigured into resource gathering or some other similar mechanic in order to further strengthen your armory or your town or whatever the inter-game sequence ends up being in this perfect world Fire Emblem. I think the components to create stronger weapons, restock caravans, and unlock maybe even different seals for leveling should all be found within the gameplay. This could be implemented in hundreds of different ways, but I think what I'm really speaking to is a philosophy of how Fire Emblem games can be designed. I really like the idea of much more interplay between the post-battle and in-battle sequences, for lack of better words. This way, moment-to-moment combat will affect how your base ends up looking, which will in turn affect how you're able to outfit your army for the next battle. That feeling of each component of the gameplay loop feeding into the other one versus them being completely isolated, that's really what I'm looking for here. So yeah, overall, super pumped about Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave. Just wanted to get a couple ideas out there as to what could potentially make the game better. And obviously the game is, maybe it's not obvious, but the game has most likely been created already and probably ready to go. So I don't think they're going to be using any of these ideas, but just wanted to get these thoughts out anyways because I'm pumped for the game. Now before I head out, I just wanted to field a video idea for my small audience here. So I'm thinking of calling it Fireball Emblem. Basically an Iron Man run where every time I use the turn wheel, I would have to take a drink or a shot. And I'm not the biggest fan of drinking, but I think it would make for some pretty funny content. So I guess I'm willing to put my body on the line if people are interested. So yeah, that's pretty much it for me. Thanks for listening to my list and catch you on the next one. Peace.